Dennis, we're ready to go. Thank
Okay.
you. All righty. So I have a very simple, basic question for you.
Is it a trick? That's always trouble.
What do you mean, is it a trick? What would you mean by, is it a trick? You see, I have explained it many times down here and elsewhere. There are no trick questions. But there are questions that we often answer from one perspective that could have an answer from a different perspective and might give us a little insight. So here's the question. Does God get angry?
Yes.
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 It says in scripture he does.
Yep,
He burns
yep, he
with
gets
anger.
angry.
Yeah, I know.
What about the temple when he threw him out of
Yes,
the
right.
temple?
We threw him out of the temple. All right, well, let's
Yeah.
ask the question this way.
Try it again.
Why?
Why?
Why would God get angry?
Jealous.
Well,
Like that.
didn't he get angry when he brought the flood? He got angry with humanity?
Disobedience.
Disobedience.
Other
Yes.
gods.
Right.
Continuous
Other gods.
disruption of our relationship.
Now,
with him.
I'm sorry?
Disruption of our relationship.
Disruption of our relationship with Him.
Or he with us.
And I have another
Yeah?
one, and that is, we're made in God's image.
All right.
And I think he has some of our frail qualities.
Oh, you do?
The angel argued, Abraham argued with God when he was going to Sodom and Gomorrah. And Moses asked for forgiveness for his people because of the false gods, when they were going bad down when he was up on the mountain.
Okay.
And all these times, God was reasonable and listened and like simmered down, like when I get mad and my wife talks to me. And I
And then it
think,
gets worse?
no, but I really think that in some ways he has some of our traits, that's why he can understand us.
So is God imperfect?
No.
No.
Are our traits of getting angry imperfect traits?
Yes. That doesn't mean that he's imperfect.
Then can God get angry?
Yes.
Righteousness.
Wait a minute, wait.
Who says that anger has to be bad? It's just an emotion.
Well, that's what I want to know is, using that framework, does God act out of emotion?
No.
Wait a minute.
I'm not sure, I think he does sometimes.
Now, here's the real question. How do the scriptures portray all of this? See, what I want to distinguish is between what I think and what the scriptures reveal. All right?
Yeah.
Anybody can make up anything they want and say, I think God is like this, or I think God is like that, or I think God does this. I want to know from the scriptures, how do we get to know who God is? All right? Now, one comment was, God gets angry when people disobey. So, huh?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
Continuous rejection.
I'm sorry?
Continuous rejection.
Continuous rejection.
Or disobedience.
So,
I think he's not pleased, would be the word, pleased.
well, there sounds like a lot more than not pleased in some of these.
But would that be the interpretation of what the meaning of what's being written? Like you say, there's so many different ways to take like sin and everything. There's so many definitions. That's why we have classes like this, so we can get interpretations from others.
Ooh.
You know what, I would like God
Shut
to
it down.
have the emotion of love and not just be a cold.
So you'd like God to have the emotion of love, but how about anger?
That has
I
to
think
come
that comes
with it.
with the love.
Why do we get angry?
Not getting what
Because we get
want.
upset.
We don't get our
Not
way.
getting what we want and not getting our way.
Right.
All right? So, there are 3 pieces of pizza. I want them all. I get angry if somebody takes one of them. Okay? I get angry when somebody else gets the job I wanted. Or when somebody else gets 4 pieces of candy and I only get 3. All right? So, anger in that sense is when someone else does not do what we want them to, or they do something we don't want them to. Okay? Do both of those work?
Yeah.
All right, if I ask my kids to take out the trash and I come home and they didn't take out the trash, I can be angry because they didn't do something. So does God get angry when people disobey the 10 Commandments?
No,
No.
I'm not sure if he gets angry because he's, he doesn't really have to get angry because he's got so much power.
I think he gets
That
hurt.
he can change things or he can whatever. He doesn't have to
Well,
really
then
get angry.
why when we're born doesn't God change things and make us all perfect and holy?
Because
Sin.
then there'd
We're
be
not.
no
Because of
point
Adam and
for
Eve.
us being here. We
So
have,
we're here only because we're sinners.
yeah, no, we're here to worship God, and when we don't, we lose our way. But if he made us robots, what would be the point?
I'm not saying robots. We're Adam and Eve robots.
No, in the beginning, but
They were perfect at first.
they
Okay.
didn't know a lot of things.
Hmm?
They didn't know anything about sin.
Did God want them to learn about sin?
Well, I don't know, but I'm just saying, they
Well,
kind of lived in a
but
perfect world.
we do know, because he says, I put you in this garden, the day that you take of the fruit of this tree that is in the midst of the garden, you will surely die. Which
That
means to
doesn't
be
make
dis, huh?
That isn't sin.
Oh, really?
Well, I don't think they think that it's sin. It's just a life and death thing.
Well,
I
that's what
think
sin
that
is.
Yeah.
Sin is life and death,
Yeah.
That's exactly
okay?
it.
Sin is not just, I giggled during the Lord's Prayer. All right? Sin is to act against the way God built us to be.
So we displease him.
So he makes us to be one thing and we act opposite. So let's take a marriage where someone acts against the relationship by flinging dishes. Okay? Grandma's dishes. Her grandma's dishes. All right? Knowing full well what we're doing, that we're acting against the relationship in some way. I will show you that you can't control me, or some version of that. Did Adam and Eve think that way when they were in the garden?
No. I don't
At
think
what
so.
time?
Well, let's talk, I'll assume before the fall.
Okay, yeah.
Was there anything that they were driven to do that would go against God?
No.
I don't
No.
think
No.
so.
Okay, not that we know of, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have to go with whatever the text tells us. I mean, we can guess our way into anything we want, but let's look at what the text says or doesn't say. All right? Now, God says, the day you take of the fruit of the tree, you will surely die. And what happens when they take the fruit of the tree?
They displease God.
They were
Okay?
naked.
Now, you say they displease God.
They died,
Not-
not
Well,
real
but
kind of death.
but not a real, oh boy, we're going here today. Man, the birds are flying around. We have a lot of terms. Now, did they just displease God?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's as far as it went.
They
No, no. They knew
disobeyed. They disobeyed
Disobeyed what?
the command that God gave them to,
the trust.
Okay,
that they would die if they ate.
did they?
No.
They died in their relationship between God,
Is
but they
that
didn't.
good, or is that the big one or the little one?
That's a big one.
That's the biggie.
Big
The
Yeah.
physical is the little one,
Yeah, right.
all right?
Yeah.
So, can you be alive and dead at the same time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's dead people drive by church every day. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding at all. I'm dead serious about that. There are people who are at enmity with God who drive by the church every day, and they're living people in cemeteries. If we look at it from the perspective of faith, the trick question side of the game. All right? Now, if somebody is dead, Paul says in Ephesians, that you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked. So he talks about dead people walking. All right? Broken in their relationship with God. How do you undo that? How can you undo that brokenness?
You can't.
Thank you.
We can't.
You can't. You can't. So people who say, well, I made my decision for Christ.
Oh, yeah, well,
Well, you mean you were dead and you made your decision to be alive? So if I think I'm in charge of that relationship, then I'm going to think I can live within it and adjust it and do whatever I want all along the way. If was Adam in a relationship with God when God breathed the breath of life into him?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Was he 10 minutes before that?
Yes.
See, I believe he was. I believe
No.
he wasn't.
No, it's the Spirit of God being in him that gives that relationship. And he will act consistently with that. Sin is to act against that relationship. All right? Now, how many chances do you get to sin? What? How many chances do you get to sin? How many chances did Adam? How many chances did Adam get to sin?
Once.
One. And Eve?
Once.
One. And then they were outside the relationship. Now they were still in the garden until what did God do? Threw them out.
No, they weren't thrown out, they left, didn't they?
No, they were thrown out.
Well, they tried to. They thought they could just stay and hide around among the trees. He says, "You get out of here."
Right.
And then he puts the cherub at the east end of the garden, saying, "You don't get back in here." So anyone who thinks they can get back in on their own is in trouble. How many chances did we have when we were born to sin?
We didn't.
We had no chance.
We're
born
born
with.
in that broken relationship.
Right.
So we don't get any chance to try and say, well, am I going to do this right or am I going to do this wrong? We are born at enmity with God. What do we call that in the church, in Lutheran circles anyway? Original sin. From our origin, we are at enmity with God. So there is nothing we can do to escape that. If somebody from the outside doesn't help us, we're in trouble. The whole point of the Christian faith is that Christ's death, as he comes outside the relationship with his Father and dies out in our broken world, that he can bring us back in. So when we believe in Jesus as our Savior from our sinful condition, the scriptures say, he who believes and is baptized will be saved. And so we are saved. Don't worry about the baptism part of it right now, okay? That's from Mark. We'll talk about that later in more detail. But we're in a restored relationship. It's not complete, but it's already there. So believers are at peace with God. Always add two words, in Christ. It's not enough to believe in God. It's to believe in God through the work of Jesus Christ, who we don't just believe that God's kind of out there, but that he is actually, I'm going to use the word Lord, in our new Christian life. He's once again guiding our heart like he was guiding Adam and Eve before the fall into sin. Now, does God get angry? If God gets angry, does he get angry because of what people do. Like, let's say, somebody brings an animal for a sacrifice and nobody noticed that there was a cut on the inside of the back leg. Does God get angry for that?
No.
Did he say bring a perfect animal?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But what happens if there's an imperfect animal?
And it's not a good sacrifice.
He's not happy about it.
Well,
He's not pleased.
Now, is being not happy about it the same as
yeah.
he is angry?
Angry, yeah.
Well,
They talk about that as unwitting
Yeah.
sin, where you do something you didn't know you were doing. Okay?
on
Now,
balance, yeah.
let's say that someone commits adultery. All right? Are they in the relationship anymore?
No.
No.
They can be forgiven, but they've
Oh,
broken it.
man.
Now, can they be forgiven back here?
You read back in the Old Testament,
Back here in Numbers and Leviticus and Exodus.
if
Okay.
they give enough, they get stoned to death after a while.
After a while. Soon.
You can-
If they-
Right
if
at the
they have
time.
Yeah, sooner or later they get walloped a good one, right?
Yeah, if, you know, they can offer, you know, whatever the requirement was, and if they don't do that, and if they recommit adultery, I think they can be stoned.
The odd thing, I don't know that we have this, well, just offer a sacrifice. We've got a passage in here that says that if a woman is suspected of adultery, she has to drink some kind of odd water,
Right.
and it will, at the very minimum, keep her from ever reproducing again.
Right.
All right? So you sin and there is a consequence right away. Or if your husband suspects you and you didn't sin, then the bitter waters will not hurt your body. All right? And he gets off scot-free even though he accused you.
I don't get that.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of them in here.
Yeah.
I want to try and play around with this a little bit, but
Sort of one-sided.
Yeah.
we get angry usually when we have a list in our mind of what we expect of someone and they don't do it to our level of expectation. What I want to ask is that when God gets angry?
Not necessarily.
I think God gets angry when we reject the whole relationship and we want to put ourselves in His place.
Okay, when we reject the whole relationship. All right. The Bible has a variety of words for God's anger. Okay, a variety of situations
Yeah,
for
like
that.
wrath and stuff.
Wrath and anger and all that. You see, you're using English words. Okay, but in Hebrew, there are a variety of different words that can be used as well. One of them is with the word af, which means nose. His nose gets red. He's snorting. One of them is charon, and there are several other words as well that come up from time to time. It's not enough just to try and say, what do we mean by anger? And then to try to figure out when God gets angry. What would... You see, the problem is, a lot of people think, I did something wrong, and God wasn't real pleased with it, so He's going to make some trouble for me. He's going to do something to hurt me a little bit. Yeah, going to get even. He's going to let me know that this crime pays. He's going to wallop me a good one. He is going to take the switch out on me. For what purpose?
Bring us
Even
back in line.
Training,
To get us back in line?
training,
Training. Spare the rod, spoil a child kind of thing?
yeah.
Does God do that?
No.
There are so many passages that we run across that I think
I think he
we,
does.
as lay people, come up with this idea because, like, I think of when he's talking to Job and he's saying, who are you? Are you the one that's put the stars in the sky and created the earth? And,
Okay.
you know, he's kind of giving him a lashing, you know. And
I don't know if he's giving him a lashing
a
or as much
tongue,
as...
a verbal,
Challenge.
I don't think
maybe
so.
it's a verbal
I don't think so.
displeasure.
I don't think so. I don't think he is there. I think he says, you're talking as if you're in charge. You aren't really, are you? It's
Right.
almost more letting him back to being a human and saying, I've got all this taken care of. In my airplane illustration, we'll get there when we get to Job. I think his friends were so much accusing him of jumping out of the plane, he fell in the cockpit. And God says, you want to fly this thing? He says, no, sir. Because he doesn't sin against God.
No, I know.
He never sins against God, so God is in some way helping him see where he fits. But what I want to know is, when I get a flat tire, what's God trying to teach me?
Patience.
Huh?
Patience.
Patience. Really?
Don't try.
Uh-huh.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Well, because.
How do you know that this morning, very early, I twisted my ankle? Okay? What's God trying to teach me?
Nothing. You were just a klutz right then.
God isn't teaching you anything.
And I was a klutz last night when I pinched my finger, right?
Yeah.
Is God trying to teach me anything with that?
I don't think so.
I'm sorry?
Telling you to
Careful.
Be careful.
be careful, focus.
All right, I remember once I was looking for our kids at Concordia. They were taking piano lessons, and I had to get home to get to a meeting, and I had trouble finding them. I got in the car, my left coat pocket hooked the turn signal arm, and I broke it. Okay, now I might say, well, God's trying to teach me not to be angry or whatever the case may be. Is God directly involved in every one of those things?
No.
No.
Yes.
No.
That's self-made.
It's self-made. Can I get any insight about what I should do?
Yeah.
On the basis, yeah, maybe don't be so angry or something like that. I have never broken a steering or turn signal thing again. Okay? I have abandoned my children many times, but that's I learned my lesson. Just forget them if I can't find them. Yes.
There's something that always bothered me when those two fellows that were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and they're doing something that I consider respectful when it was just automatic. They didn't want it to fall, so they touch it and then they get zapped dead.
Yeah. Well, Perez does. Perez Uzzah. Yeah.
How does that fit in?
I'm going to talk about that yet today. Not that specific case, but that concept. Okay? So remind me, don't let me get away without saying something about it, but let me leave that because I'm leading into it. I'm throwing the net.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Back here in Leviticus 26, it would be verse like 16.
Okay?
I will inflict terror upon you, consumption and fever that waste the eyes away and exhaust the breath of life.
Okay?
So
Does he do that out of anger? What is
I
what's the context of 26? It's the end of the holiness code.
right.
But what-
It's the curses that are set upon us.
Are they curses? Are they curses?
Well, that's the title of this section of my Bible.
Yeah, well.
And it's the
What is the
Jerusalem
reason?
Bible.
What is the reason for those things to happen?
Disobedience.
No, what's the reason for those things to happen? Reward for obedience? No.
No.
I don't care what your Bible says. I really don't.
No, it is.
Chapter 26 says, I will continue to bless you. I promise to bless
That's
you.
where
No,
it starts blessings.
It
yeah.
starts with saying,
Yeah.
if everything continues to go well in the relationship, you'll have grain, you'll have wine, you'll
Yes.
have oil, you'll have all of the things that I promised I would give you, and you will see them come.
Yes.
Now, I love you enough that if you start turning away, I will let some things happen that I've been holding back because I don't want you to be completely lost. So, if, for example, you see that it rains on one field and not on another. Begin to say, God said that would only happen if we start turning away from Him. Where are we turning away from the relationship? If that one doesn't get you, it'll get a little worse, and a little worse, and a little worse, and a little worse, to the point of, even if you are in exile and have been taken away from your land, and you finally realize you've turned away from me, I call you to come back. Now, so He is helping them at that point. The question that I want to make sure is, we look at how that works for today. He is letting them think at that point so that they can say, something's going wrong here. Because, well, God said He would take care of us. Now that's not happening. But He warned us beforehand that it was going to be that something would happen to try and bring us to our senses, to try and help us realize we're wandering away. Now, I used to do this, it's sort of like a stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 kind of thing. I would do this with my kids, or my wife would do it. Supper's getting on the table, wash your hands and come up. Your mother's putting supper on the table, would you please get your hands washed and come upstairs? Mom's putting the stuff on the table, would you please get your hands washed and come up here? If you don't get up here right now, you're not going to eat anything. You're going to go to bed hungry. And the next one, of course, is when they have to call the ambulance. One of us. Now, but we do that. We sort of have some of those. Huh?
Accelerate.
We accelerate it. When I used to drive through Chicago with my family, I would say we're at stage 5 right now. I don't have time to even yell at you. Please be quiet. The time they listened the best and the quietest they ever were was the first Thanksgiving after we moved here in '82. We went down to Kansas City for Thanksgiving, and we ran into ice all the way from about Iowa City to the Minnesota border. They all knew this was scary enough that they didn't say a word, and I never had to ask them. They all recognized something serious is going on here. I don't know how I'd have ever gotten off. And if they didn't have salt when we got into Minnesota, I don't know where I'd have stayed, but I wasn't going any farther. And I had been told, well, classes start tomorrow morning, and it's a residential institution, so the students will be here, you ought to be here. Nowadays, I would have said, I'm going to come tomorrow, and if I miss a couple classes, dock my pay. I'm not going to risk my family's health for that. But we all knew there was a very serious situation. Okay. Now, if it doesn't seem very serious, people don't take it with great seriousness.
Yeah.
And part of everything from Exodus, well, really Exodus all the way through Deuteronomy, is the relationship with God is a serious one. This is not a game. This is not just toying around. This is not just some Santa Claus or Easter Bunny story. This is something very serious about you and your God. Now, I do not know why this happens, but very often people will say, well, God must be trying to teach me something. Hear people say that?
Oh, yeah.
God must be trying to teach me something. You know what the biggest problem with that is? How do you know what?
Your mom tells you.
How does she know?
I don't know, but that's how I learned a lot of stuff.
But is so. Let's go deep, okay? I've had prostate cancer. What's God trying to teach me?
Nothing. It was
How do you know?
I've had prostate cancer too.
We don't know.
because
So how do you know?
Because God is full of love.
Well, then how come there's wrath and anger and all this?
Because that's the only way He can get our attention.
Really?
Yeah.
So what's He getting my attention for with my prostate cancer?
Dig a hole.
Well, he's just trying to.
How do you know, and you're gonna say that sentence, how do you know that he's really doing what you're saying he's
We
doing?
can't
He's
figure
just
it out.
trying
We don't know.
to.
We
I wanna know,
I
where do you
don't.
get that from? Okay, let's start with that.
Okay,
All right, because a lot of times we will say things that we say, well, God is this or this or this, when we're just flat guessing. And so if things happen to me for a reason, ever heard anybody say, oh, I believe everything happens for a reason?
Jeez.
Whatever that means.
that means everything under heaven happens for a reason. It goes back to
And
that.
how do I know what the reason is?
We may not.
Well, it tells you in the Bible about the seasons and that
No,
reason and
no, I'm not
stuff.
talking about that. I'm talking about my flat tire or my
Oh.
twisted ankle or my prostate cancer.
You won't find it in the Bible.
All right, but you see, what a lot of times people will do is they will say, this happened, wonder what God is trying to teach me, and then they'll go somewhere and trying to figure something out. And then they'll act on that. So, I had a member one time who fell off a roof and broke his back. All of a sudden his wife and 4 children are in church. Every Sunday. Till he went home from the hospital, then they weren't there anymore.
Yeah.
So they're acting as if God is spanking them a little bit for not being in church. Soon as the pressure's off, they're gone again. So there are ways in which people will do something like that. Was there a greater attendance in church in 2001 in October?
Yes.
In
Yeah.
some places.
Oh,
Yeah.
Some places.
In some places not. A lot of things that happen to us now are not even seen as religious events. But why did the towers go down? I heard somebody say it's because God really is angry with our capitalistic society. Well, you say no. How come New Orleans flooded? Some people say it's because of all the filth that goes on in the Big Easy, and God is trying to show that he is unhappy with it. How come a plane gets blown out of the air in the eastern Ukraine? And, people are going to make all sorts of observations. Why this, why that, why this, why that. And some of you have alluded to this already. I think it may be possible, this is just my guess, that there may be things that happen that lead us to say, this helps me to reevaluate what my life is and where I'm going with it. I don't know what I'm supposed to make of prostate cancer. Some people say, well, you eat too much cheese. Well, okay, so I don't eat cheese anymore, so who knows? But if I'm going to look at an event, and I say I live within the presence of God, then if I make any guess, I'm making up something that I might be able to live with that may have nothing to do with the truth. And the scriptures don't tell us why things happen. There is not a single flat tire in the Bible.
But there were plagues and things that
But,
happened.
but to whom did the plagues go? Did the
They
plagues go to people whom God was trying to turn around? Did the plagues go to Pharaoh and his host?
Yes.
Well, it affected them.
Did it go to them so that they would become believers in Yahweh?
No.
Why did the plagues come?
Let the people go.
Yeah, God says, I want you to let my people go, and I'm going to find a way to take enough power away from you that you can't hold them anymore. They're on the outside. They're part of the enemy. They're not part of the inside. So when I look at something, I have to say, does that happen to a believer or an unbeliever? Now, when we look at Leviticus 26, that's where God says, there may be things that happen to you where I want you to realize you're leaving me. By the time you get to the prophets, and we look at those, the prophets are going to say they're gone. And God doesn't necessarily say, oh, all you have to do is say you're sorry and I'll take you back. That's not in the Bible. You leave, you leave. And so I think it's very helpful, and I simply learned a long time ago a couple of words to use. Anger, as I see it in life, is when someone does not fulfill a certain expectation. So somebody might say, well, here's all these commandments, and we are breaking them, and God's getting angry. I think that's how Judaism would explain when troubles would come. We haven't done a good enough job, and I don't know internally whether different branches of Judaism would look at it that way, but the idea of we haven't done enough to fulfill everything. You haven't gotten everything done on your assignment. So you figured out everything except you forgot to translate meters into feet. And thus you missed Mars. You crashed. And so there's just one thing you did wrong, but you blew it. And so you get punished because of something you do wrong. God gets angry because you haven't fulfilled some expectation that He has of you. That's not the Bible. Okay, the Scriptures, and I'm going to simply use the word wrath for it. God's wrath comes when His love is rejected. God's wrath comes when His love is rejected. And so we see Adam and Eve saying to God, we don't need you. It's not when someone doesn't fulfill God's expectations. It comes when people say, we don't need you at all. So, you have a whole bunch of cases here. 250 get torched with fire. The earth swallows and opens people up. When people say, God, we're going to run it our way. We don't believe you love us. We're going to do things our own way here right now. And therefore, in other words, I want you to look at where in the sequence of events things happen. All right? What was God doing in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve to try to train them to be better?
He was walking with them.
Tell them not to get the two trees.
What was He doing in the garden trying to get them to be better?
They already were, they were perfect.
They already were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay? He's not training them to do anything.
No.
He's in their heart. He's moving them. They enjoy the fellowship with Him. When they turn away from Him and figure out they're naked, what do? They go hide. Because now they see a brokenness between them and God. And then God finds Adam and says, oh, Adam, that's okay. Nobody's perfect.
Really?
Right?
No.
Get out of here, you.
Yes.
Take your wife with you. I'll be with you out there, but you get out of the garden. You don't belong here anymore. Okay? Now that's rage. That's wrath. But it's not intended to turn anybody around. How many people converted during the flood?
They're all gone,
Nobody, right?
except the 8. Yeah.
They didn't convert.
They were in a relationship.
They were in the relationship from the get-go.
Well, yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
How about at Sodom and Gomorrah? How many converted? How many had a chance to? Probably 2. The daughter's fiancés. But they think it's an idle tale. So there were 2 who had the chance at that point and didn't. Why does God pour His wrath out on Sodom and Gomorrah? Is it so that they will change?
No.
No. He says, you have rejected me. I don't know all the story about it. I know that Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim were treated kindly by God when Abraham rescued them from the 4 kings of southern Iraq, and then they go back to be wicked. So He has been gracious in a certain sense. With the children of Israel coming into the land, He says, these people have had several hundred years where they just continue to be more and more self-centered. So what I want you to think about is there are some things that happen that do not happen so that some will change their ways. Some happen because God says, you filthied up my land and I'm not going to take it anymore. You filthied up the earth, and I'm not going to take it. Yes, ma'am.
I might be opening a more direction here.
That's the way we go.
But especially when you were talking about nowadays, and we consider what is God want to teach us, what are we going to say those lessons and things, and I'm thinking, well, we live in a world that's considered, I mean, through the Bible we learn that Satan is the prince of this world, and we fight against principalities and powers, and I think that a lot of those things, isn't that influencing what happens to us in the mix here? It's just, you were talking like, I mean, we were responding like God is in control, and it's his doing, and
Well, you see, when we talk about the principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places, we're aware of them. I don't think our job is to defeat them.
no, but I'm just saying to recognize that some of these things, Satan is not just in the heavenlies, but in this world trying to.
And we don't know. This is one of the points that Luther makes. We don't know when things happen. Is it the Almighty God, or does he give what we would call evil beings or evil angels a chance to do some things that can give trouble to us? But the devil did not make Adam and Eve do it. I don't have to fall. I may be more aware of the grace of God when I am tempted. But what I want to think about at this point is, number one, we're looking at the holiness of God. And that he says, I will dwell in the midst of all of you, but I don't want you just thinking you can do anything. There are limits to what you can do. And when you act as if you can either be over me or that you don't need me, you can break the relationship forever. So we don't really, it's interesting, but I don't remember anything that says, let's take each one of the commandments and here's how we're going to deal with it if you do this one. There's a couple of them where you have that. If you have idols, then you get stoned. You know, wizards or things like that. You just get stoned. All right? Sometimes God is gracious and gives them a way to confess their sin. And sometimes it's in big things. But when we look at whole burnt offerings, it doesn't say exactly what occasioned a whole burnt offering, or a peace offering, or a sin offering, or a guilt offering. There's a few things, but so coveting. And in the Bible, these are not just, it's in your mind. Coveting would be finding a legal way to get what someone else had. A legal way, so that nobody would call it stealing. All right? Stealing's going to be a different one. And so it's not like we have, okay, here's the 10 Commandments, and they line up with these different kind of sacrifices. But when anything would happen to them, it would happen, as God says here, and it's in the realm of natural disasters or wars, to help them at a certain time recognize we're going away from God. The book of Amos, when we get there, is a nice, clear example of this. Where Amos says, do you see the fact it's not raining here and it's raining over there? Or there are people raiding us at 2 o'clock in the morning, or whatever the case may be. And so there are some things. That's not God's anger and that's not God's wrath. That's God's love saying, hey, watch out, you're wandering away from me. Don't do it. It may be a bad thing for me. But the trouble is, today, if I try to impose that on everything that happens, that was back then in a very narrow society. It's descriptive of what happened. If I make it prescriptive, then I'm going to think every time something happens, God is trying to train me a little bit more, get me on the right path by give me a licking. The New Testament says, let the love of Christ move you to act. It is God's love that motivates us living out our life, not God's spanking, God's hurting us to shape us up, which means hellfire and damnation needs to go in the trash and never be used anywhere. Why would somebody fall in love with God by being yelled at by him? You don't fall in love with a girl that way. You don't go out on a date with a girl and then pick her apart and find fault with her. Well, you go on one date. Second one, probably not. That's usually not the smart way to start it. But I want to think about what's actually here, and because there's so much of what happens that sounds religious or sounds godly, but it doesn't really square with even what we have here. And so it wasn't the little things or the step out of line. It was the kind of thing that the little things we might think of as little, a lot of those are saying, I'm outside the relationship. So it can be bearing false witness against your neighbor takes you out of the relationship with God. We would say, wait a minute. You mean when I gossip and maybe I stretch a little bit? Yep. Because you're taking somebody whom God loves and putting them in a bad light before others and trying to convince others not to like them. Well, that's not a bad thing like rape or murder or something like that, is it? Well, it's all one of those deals. And see, what we really do is we dummy God down. It's not like we think he's great and big and mighty and powerful. We dummy him down to be just, well, those are the 10 suggestions, or those don't matter. Or, I do what I want to do. This whole section, particularly from Exodus 19 at Mount Sinai, all the way through to chapter 40, all Leviticus, and all to chapter 10, verse 11 in Numbers, is all about how do you live as a holy community. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. We have to play with what holy means as well and understand that. But this whole big chunk is a couple of years. Getting to the land, getting it built, not even that really. But from the time that they're delivered from Egypt, it's all just a very short period of time to say, what is this relationship all about? And what I want to make sure of is that I don't try to read into the Bible my own desires for how I'm going to get someone to do something. Because how did they get there? I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So they're there because God has brought them there. Not because of something they performed. They can wreck it, but they can't make it happen. They can't make God love them. There are things that they do, whether foolishly or on a whim, or maybe even with intention, where God says, as you acknowledge you've sinned against me, acknowledge my holiness by giving something that's very important and alive to me. So they might have a drink offering. Drink offering's not for sin. Okay? A burnt offering of grain or bread, that's not for sin. We're talking about something dies. And so it's being aware there is a real relationship that goes on here. So if people would say to me, well, that's just your opinion from the Bible. I have had people say that to me. Well, that's just your opinion. And it gets into things like care for each other in the body of Christ. I'll take care of myself. Others can take care of themselves. I'm not responsible for anybody else. Oh, really? Well, the scriptures say we are. That we are responsible for each other.